Good evening and welcome to the Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Democratic Party. And I'm really happy that you are spending half an hour with us on this Monday evening. It is a pleasure to have this chance to visit with you. As you know, I hope by now each of our broadcasts focuses on one topic. And we have found that these are things that are interesting and of importance to Democrats in Oklahoma and honestly, all progressive thinking people. And we are so appreciative of those of you who have been tuning in and sharing these broadcasts. I'll remind you that any previous programs that you may have missed are available at okdemocrats.org/YouTube. A special word of thanks to my last week, Tamaya Cox Toure from Planned Parenthood. What an amazing, brilliant advocate that she is. And I'm really happy that she was able to spend some time with us and articulate things that we all have to be concerned about right now. This evening's topic is on the media. Glenn Beck, the toady of the current president, was quoted recently as saying, "Anyone that holds a degree in journalism is an enemy of the state." Now, that's a pretty broad brush to be painted with, and I certainly took exception to that. But he's just following the guidance of his mentor. The current president has said that the media is the true enemy of the people, and he has also said that they are evil people. The press, the media, they are bad people, and nobody likes them. Well, I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because I put great value on true journalists who are doing their best to bring us news in an unvarnished, unbiased way. And that's why I'm particularly happy to welcome our guest this evening. He is someone, actually, he is the very first journalist to interview me when I returned to Oklahoma City some years ago. And he interviewed me then and has dozens of times since then. And this is the first opportunity that I've had to reverse roles by interviewing him. It's my privilege to welcome to our program a terrific journalist and someone whom I admire greatly, and I'm very proud to call a friend. Phil Cross joins us this evening. Phil, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Scott, and thanks for the kind introduction. I really appreciate that.
You know, when you announced that you were leaving local television, that was a blow to me because I found that your reporting was very strong. You were tenacious in getting stories that other people did not. And that's the difference to me between a journalist and a reporter, because you really got up under issues and frankly under the skin of a lot of folks that probably did not appreciate seeing you coming their direction.
I didn't get a lot of Christmas cards.
I sent you one.
Yeah, yes, you did.
Let me ask you. This is a very serious question. You had a strong career in Oklahoma City journalism. I remember at one point when you had renewed your contract, you announced that you and your family were truly making Oklahoma City your home. And that's a big statement for a local journalist because so many people just are eager to move from where they are. But you took this very seriously. And so it was a surprise to me when you made this announcement a few years back. Can you give us a little background on what led you to make that decision, Phil?
Well, Scott, I loved what I did. I loved being a journalist. I'm still able to do a little bit of that. I loved working in TV news. I loved the medium. I loved a lot of the people I worked with. But the industry had changed overall, and I liked where it was going, but I didn't like necessarily some of the things that came with it. We saw, in journalism in general. You'll see this in print media. You'll see this in broadcast as well, where as big companies buy up these local stations, these local media outlets, we're seeing seasoned journalists kind of put out to pasture, laid off, and you lose that kind of depth of knowledge, all that context and everything that goes into it We're seeing a push for more content, now, and not doing more of the well-researched. It was one of the things that, I was being asked to do more stories that were, quote, low-hanging fruit, like, let's go check out the health department and restaurant inspections. And, I'm like, what if we dug into political spending? And so I love doing that. I was very blessed to do that. On a personal side, I had some personal issues with the direction and some of the culture in the newsroom I was at, and I was offered a contract renewal. They made an offer to keep me on. They asked me, both my bosses, everybody had asked me to stay multiple times, but ultimately there was a culture issue there that I asked for a change in, and when that wasn't willing to happen, I stood on some principles and let that part of my life go.
And I have to say, I know that had to be a tough decision because you do have a family, and that had to be a hard one. But I really admire the fact that you were able to stand up to what you believe in. I was doing a bit of research on Sinclair Broadcasting Group, and they own television stations around the country. They're in over 100 markets, 193 stations. They cover about 40% of the U.S., and is particularly strong in right-leaning states in those markets. And I've noticed some of the things that they have done that I find rather confounding. They issued a decree that all of their stations had to run an editorial, and it was written. And if you look at a compilation of the stations, it is word for word that the anchors read these statements talking about how the integrity of their station was so strong, but then decrying this growing trend in fake news. I'm really so tired of that expression, fake news.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it seems to me that those who cry that the loudest are actually the ones who are most guilty of it. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what changed in your dozen years as a reporter here in Oklahoma City. You hit the ground running as a journalist, but what happened in terms of the way that the public treated you? Did that change over that time?
Well, you see, I'm seeing it change even now, and even it's really crazy. I'm now teaching a journalism program, and we put out like a newsletter of just a summary of local news stuff as to our students and our parents, and it's just down the line of, this is the news that's happening now, and I'll get replies back from some people saying, wow, this is too liberal, or this is too conservative, and I don't understand it. But when I started in TV news in Oklahoma City, it was a dominant field. I mean, we had, you could have any given night, just thousands of people watching. And I saw the ratings share in 12 years go from this giant behemoth down to, before I left Fox 25, we were, all four stations were fighting over a share of viewers that any one station could have, any one of the big three or big two, I guess, 4 or 9, could have easily pulled that off in a single night themselves. I mean, that's how little the audience shrunk. So what we saw is an explosion in social media. We saw an explosion in streaming. Whenever, you got to think, a dozen years ago, it doesn't seem like that far long ago, but we had the first iPhone come out. We had, Facebook was just then letting people outside of college get on it. We didn't have Twitter yet. But then through that, Netflix was still sending you DVDs in the mail, and that was cutting edge at the time. We were concerned of, like, did you hear about this new thing that outside of CVS where you can put $1 in and it'll give you your DVD? That's where we were at. But as we saw these streaming options go forward, and people have multiple ways to get their news and to get it right now, people stop, there's no appointment TV anymore. People stop tuning in for that. People stop picking up the morning paper. And so we saw that kind of go away. And as that went away, people stopped thinking about your local media as being your friends and neighbors. And especially now, what local media is not, the thing that gets me is anytime we talk about the media, the media doesn't exist. I mean, there's, I hate to break it to anybody. When you're in a local TV station, you're not part of some big multinational organization where you've got someone telling you, oh, well, what are we going to do today and how are we going to present this? That it just doesn't exist. Even within Sinclair Broadcasting, that doesn't exist. They will send down stories that they're doing, and that there have been some issues with Sinclair that have really walked right up and to the line and crossed the line sometimes, in my opinion, on editorialism. But even with that doesn't really affect your local people. You're coming in fresh from the day, trying to figure out, like, well, what's happening in town? Hey, I called the mayor of Yukon, and this is what they said that's going on. Hey, I was on next door in this neighborhood, and they saw this creepy guy in the park. Oh, let's talk to the police about that. We're listening to the scanners. We're telling what's going on in the town, where the elections are. We're talking to, trying to get both, sides of any political, issue. And so that's what's really happening. I mean, and the thing that makes me laugh a little bit whenever people think of some media conspiracy is it's a miracle any TV station gets any show on the air any night at all. There are so many moving parts to it. I mean, it's like you're trying to ride a unicycle with your hair on fire while herding cats. I mean, that is the life of and it's exciting. I mean, you would think, why would anybody want to do that? Well, it's exciting. I mean, the adrenaline that gets going, that's one of the things that I miss about a regular TV newsroom, is that kind of adrenaline of breaking news and getting out there and getting in and having a big story. So it's exciting. And then at the end of the day, that's what you've done. And the next day you get to start it all over again. And so it's you start from scratch almost every day. And that's the reality of what the media is, especially when it comes to local stuff.
Phil, that's why local news has always been a very important part of my life. I mean, growing up, it was on the first thing in the morning before Captain Kangaroo.
Yep.
Probably don't know who that is.
I know Captain Kangaroo, just barely.
But we had noon news, we had evening news, with journalists who you could respect. And then went from national to local news in the evening. We did not miss the early news or the 10 o'clock news. And the same has carried through much of my adult life. I have to say that now I'm not so much watching local news because, frankly, it's lost a lot of its value for me. And I don't feel the connectedness. As you were talking about, let's look at what's going on in our town.
Well, and that's what I mean. Every TV station in town has had almost a complete newsroom turnover, at least 3 times since I've been here. I was the one stabilizing factor for my newsroom for the longest time. I had watched friends come and go because you get this Oklahoma City used to be kind of a third stop in your journalistic career. I mean, now it's a second, maybe even a first stop for someone out of college. And we're trying to get in people that, that will honestly, they'll take less money. They have less experience. So you can pay them less. You make them do a little bit more work. And we're turning this, because it's just as expensive to run a TV station and to do all of this. And as people, turn away, you lose those viewers, you lose that ad money, but people are turning away because you're hiring, less experienced people who don't have that context. So it's really kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the end. Where you don't have good, stable journalists. I mean, look, whenever I started here, you had the Mark Opgrands of Channel 5. You had Cherokee Ballard at Channel 4. You had Scott Hines at Channel 4. You had Christian McIntyre at Channel 9. You had obviously the Ogles, they're anchoring or whatever, but you had these kind of long-term journalists. Terry Watkins had just gotten out of the news game whenever I had moved to Oklahoma. And so that was kind of the beginning of the end of this, where we started pushing out and leaving these kind of seasoned journalists and letting them kind of go away and replacing them with kids who we could honestly, I mean, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I mean, they're doing the best that they can, except they just don't have the connections and they're not part of this community. And they are here on their second job. And it's like, second job is your next, you've still got another move in you. I mean, having moved, 2 or 3 times, I can tell you that, after about that third big, or cross country move or complete, uprooting of your life somewhere, you're pretty much done with that kind of life. I mean, for the most part, especially if you, end up, meeting somebody, settling down, which is what I did. But whenever I did it, I had a chance. I was just talking to my wife about this myself. I had an opportunity to go back to my home television market, except they wanted me to take a $10,000 pay cut. And I was willing to negotiate and said, I'll take a $5,000 pay cut to come work for you. And they're like, no, we can't afford you. And I'm like, okay. And so at that point, when my wife and I got married and, when we had kids, it's like, well, our kids are going to be starting school soon. Where do we want, we made the decision that this is our home now. We have friends here. We have, their school, our church, our family is here. And so I think that kind of really helps shift that whenever you have journalists who are willing to commit to an area and the things they're reporting on affect them as well, affect their family as well.
You're right. You mentioned Scott Hines a moment ago. Scotty's a friend of mine, and when he left Oklahoma City, where he was really a fixture, people recognized him. They counted on him, on his reporting, on his good work in the community. That was another big loss. Mm-hmm. Let's pivot a little bit here. I'd like for you to spill the tea a little bit, if you would, on some of the more interesting stories that you were able to work on, especially some of the more investigative pieces that you really had a chance to sink your teeth into. What's for you, particularly in political reporting?
There are some fun times. And working with high schoolers now, I know what spill the tea means. So I'm all good on that. No, I mean, political reporting is tons of fun. Once I always say covering the Capitol is a lot more fun when you figure out who's on whose team. And I'm not talking D's and R's. I'm talking who's really on whose team. I mean, because there's about 4 different parties up at the Capitol. And besides just, D's and R's, you've got your urban versus rural. You've got, this for, it's incredible. One of my stories that I know got me some praise and some people upset. We had, when I discovered that, and I was competing with the Journal Records, M. Scott Carter on this one, but we both, he beat me to the hit publish button by about 30 minutes on it. But when I discovered that Don Arms was potentially unduly influencing the budget to hurt the agency where his mistress was working, that at the DEQ, that was a big story. Don threatened to have me arrested for trying to ask him questions and walking, in the behind the scenes of the state house. And then he had a sergeant at arms come out, move his car, and well, I'm not as fast as a moving car anymore, and so I just couldn't quite chase that one down. I remember having one time I got an invitation to coffee with a senior member of a leading political party, asking me to be nicer in my reporting of a political figure in Oklahoma, and a promise that he would be an inside source for me and give me all sorts of juicy stuff, just like he did for one of the print reporters in town, if I would just go nicer. And I'm like, that doesn't sit well with me, so I'm going to say thanks, but no thanks. My reporting is accurate. It was covering, the death penalty. I really got into that coverage with the Richard Glossop case. That case is still ongoing. I loved the work I did there. I think it took a toll on my health. My wife said it aged me about 5 years and 3 months. doing all of that. But in the end, I got to follow that story all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Best highlight of my journalism career was one. I'd always said I'd rather be lucky than good. And as luck would have it, I think I made friends with the media relations person at the U.S. Supreme Court, because when I walked up, I'd called her a number of times and she said, "Oh, you're Phil. I'm glad to meet you." She goes, "I got you a seat with an unobstructed view." I'm like, "Oh, that's nice," because there's these big columns everybody else is sitting in. And when I saw people start lining up, you get a little ticket that says a letter and a number for your seat. And all my other friends were going up there. My friend from Sky News and other people were going early. I'm like, "Well, when am I? I'm in the very back row." Oh man. No, as it turns out, the last people to go in are the closest. It turns out, I guess, one of the regular reporters for the Supreme Court was out that day. And so they gave me that national correspondent seat, which was literally right behind the sketch artist. I was 20 yards from the bench. I couldn't have been closer to the justices unless I was presenting before the court as one of the attorneys. It was incredible. And then to top that all off, I knew I had a little super secret information that I had learned about the makers of midazolam, the subject of that hearing, asking Oklahoma to return its supply of their drugs that they purchased potentially improperly for a use not accepted by the manufacturer. And so outside the Supreme Court, we've got the gaggle of national press around doing the little postmortem with both sides. And I got to ask a question of then Attorney General Scott Pruitt about this thing that he didn't really want to admit to because his office couldn't quite find the document that another state agency had provided me. And Nina Totenberg from NPR, after he dodges the question, she stops and she goes, "Wait a minute, you didn't answer that guy's question." And you got the national press asking, like all of a sudden Scott Pruitt, gets turned on the head. So I got to have fun with Scott Pruitt in front of the National Press Corps, and then all these national people are like, "Who are you and how do you know that?" I'm like, I'm just a guy from Oklahoma, guys. I'm just here having fun today. This is fantastic. And so I love that sort of thing. But it did, especially towards the end of my career, you get a lot of pushback, from political figures, and I got called into my boss's office more than one time, more than I thought needed to. A good news director should have the back of their employees, and ultimately I never got in trouble for anything I did, but I did have to handle the third degree answering questions about, "Oh, why did you do this? Why?" I'm like, "Well, this is why I did that." They didn't answer the question, so I kept asking it, and so it was getting tough to really kind of pull through and keep on doing that, But I walked away with a ton of great memories. I've got a video clip of Mary Fallon joking about hitting me with a sledgehammer. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, and those are the kind of things that you want to hang on to forever. I love to recount how I was on an elevator at the Capitol one day. The door opened and she stepped on, saw that it was me, and then she backed off the elevator. So that's the last encounter I had with her. I want you to speak just a little bit, Phil, about, because the landscape of Oklahoma is largely conservative. How did you approach fairly reporting for both sides? And I will say that you did a yeoman's job of that. But what went into your process of being fair in your covering of both Republicans and Democrats?
So, and I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of people will try to pigeonhole me into a political party, which it is laughable to me. But I approach every story with the same kind of viewpoint. It was research. Know what you're reporting on. Know what you're going to be talking about. Know what the issues are, and know what both sides are going to have to say. Walk in knowing the talking points before you get to any interview, and then try to get around the talking points when you do that. And I would, if it was especially a controversial issue, I even tried to measure out the time, like what are my sound bites that I'm picking? How long are they? Am I making sure that each side gets equal time to present their best argument? There are times that you can interview somebody and just present as like, "Oh, well, I interviewed that side," and you can present what they had to say and make them look like a total fool. But, I don't think that's my job as a journalist. I don't think that's doing good journalism. It's accurately portraying what is this issue. Here's how conservatives view this issue. Here's how liberals view this issue. this is why there's a disagreement. I saw a lot of what I did as education whenever I was on the air. I covered, whenever I first started here, we had a Democratic governor. The Senate was split. We had co-president, pro tems, at the time. I asked a question of, I remember asking, it was right after Forbes rated Oklahoma City as recession proof. And I was working on a story and had talked to an economist and done some research that basically said, no, it's not. We're going to get hit bad later. And I went to a press conference with Scott Meacham and said, this is what the article says, but I've talked to economists that say we are not recession proof. It's just a matter of time till we get here. What are we doing to prepare for this? And Scott Meacham said, I don't know what you're talking. I don't know who you've been talking to. That's ridiculous. And it gets the entire press corps to laugh at me. Scott still owes me an apology for that because as it turns out, I was right. We weren't recession proof. It just hit us later. But, it was asking, knowing what you were talking about going into it. And then, when you're approaching regular people, remember that what you're talking about, especially if you're talking about stuff at the Capitol, affects every individual in Oklahoma. And I grew up in a rural area, and I think that's one of my strengths was getting out in rural Oklahoma and speaking good old boy to people, and it was crazy. Some people would see me and say, oh, you're with Fox News. I'm not going to talk to you because I hate Fox News. I'm like, oh, hey, that's the local, that's the national. I'm not with that at all. And so you play that. Sometimes it's like, oh, I love Fox News. Tell Glenn Beck hi for me. I'm like, next time I see him, I sure will. And honestly, if I ever see him, I'm going to tell him that fan in the OU parking lot with the tailgate party said hi to him. Yeah. Odds of me seeing him pretty low, but I will keep that word if I ever get that chance. But it's a matter of knowing where people are at and what affects them. And I think that's what's maybe missing in a lot of the conversation is getting to know your neighbors and really getting out of your comfort zone, out of the little bubble you live in and maybe in the metro or whatever, and getting out and exploring all of Oklahoma and saying, this is what happens around these areas. And this is how it's going to affect them. This is how policy decisions will ultimately impact, regular Oklahomans.
Phil, I've got to tell you, we just barely scratched the surface of your stories. We're just about out of time. I'm going to ask, though, that you come back and visit with us after the election and a critique of how you think it was covered for both parties. But for tonight, I just want to say thank you for joining us, Phil. Always great to see you. And I'll look forward to talking to you real soon, okay?
All right. Absolutely, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Well, we are just about out of time, and I want to thank all of you for being with us and joining us on this evening's broadcast. Also want to remind you that this program, like every program of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, takes money to make happen. And we don't take corporate money. All we can do is rely on the generosity of people who care about Oklahoma today and about its future. $5 is the minimum we can accept online just because of the processing process. But if you want to donate in any amount, you can go online. You can drop by our office with a jar full of pennies. Honestly, every contribution matters. And I thank those of you who have been so supportive of what we're doing this year. It's an incredibly important year for all of us to vote. If you have not yet voted but with your absentee ballot, you still have time to request it, but you need to do it right away. So we'll be back next week. And until then, I'm going to encourage all of us to just be a little generous of spirit in this difficult time as we look forward to hopefully a big celebration in November. I'll be back with you again next Monday evening at 7 o'clock. And until then, please take good care of yourself. Thanks for joining us. Good night.